Okay, welcome back. So the next story we're going to talk about is a story that I wrote. Because occasionally I do like to put the rubber gloves on and actually do some work.
It's always an event when that happens.
It is always an event. It is always an event. So this is that airfares actually went up in 2023, despite ACCC warning to airlines. So essentially, under the previous government, the ACCC were, at the start of COVID, kind of commissioned to do quarterly reports on the aviation industry. And these quarterly reports were basically meant to look at how the industry would restart in the wake of COVID, because you had a lot of market share change quite rapidly. Obviously, you had fleets changing all the time. We had airlines moving into routes they wouldn't previously have moved into before. So this ACCC quarterly report was set up to make sure that nobody did anything dodgy during that kind of COVID recovery period. Now, at the end of 2022, we had a situation where airfares got some of the highest in history, particularly in terms of kind of discount tickets or cheap fares. And the ACCC gave effectively a warning to airlines, and they said, in the next year, as you get into 2023, airfares need to come down. And this was obviously at a time when we were starting to see airlines post record profits. And of course, the airlines would say this sort of stuff is out of our control. This is just due to pent-up demand. Obviously, a lot of that is total tosh, because obviously if you're banking on hundreds of millions of dollars in profits, you could use those profits to lower the airfares. So effectively what the ACCC has said is that as you get into next year, you need to put more services on, you need to get more planes in the sky, and you need to bring down prices. What actually happened in 2023 is that prices went up. Now, the problem is that, to the airlines' credit, they did sort of heed the warning of the ACCC. And the capacity did go up. More planes are in the sky. They did do everything they said they would do. One of the issues is they've obviously been affected by the same thing everybody else in the world has been affected. So obviously inflation, cost of living pressures. They've also had a number of things go against them that they wouldn't have expected. So in 2022, at the end of 2022, we started to see the price of jet fuel go down from obviously the high from when we had the Russia-Ukraine war, and things to continue to go down in the first half of last year. But then in the latter half of last year, what happened is those jet fuel prices went back up again. And again, we've still had problems with inflation. We still have problems with the economy. But nonetheless, it still cost more to fly last year than it did the year before. And obviously, this again ties into what we were talking before with delays and cancellations. You are paying more money than you should be to fly, and you've got a worse service.
Rant over?
Rant over, that was a rant, but I was therefore hoping the rant would lead to some incisive analysis from yourself.
Incisive analysis. Airfares do need to come down. Obviously, if there are factors outside of your control, you can't blame the airlines for those. But as you noted, Adam, Virgin Australia back in the black for the last financial year. Qantas posting bumper record profits. Maybe some of those profits should be invested in improving the airfare situation. Yes.
The other aspect of this story is when I did it, I used our good friends, the Bitra data. Now, Bitra is able to look at prices kind of generally, but what the ACCC were able to do in their quarterly reports is actually kind of personally go and get data directly from the airlines, and also to kind of adjust it for inflation. And what they said in their last quarterly report, which I think was back in June, is that they saw an underlying situation where prices were coming down a little bit. But until we see those ACCC reports come back, we don't know exactly what the situation is, because we don't have access to its information as good as they will do. Now, the Morrison government basically decided to end those quarterly reports in June last year. They effectively have not been going on for 6 months. Catherine King, the new Transport Minister, has decided to kind of restart them, but they want to restart them in maybe more of a different way. So their idea is the ACCC will again report on the industry, but they want to do it in such a way that I think it's more measurable and there could be more action taken. So rather than just the ACCC saying this is not very good and pointing their finger
down with this sort of thing.
Yes, you will see more.
This sort of thing being airfares.
Yes, this sort of thing being airfares. Then the government will be able to step in and act. This is also going to happen in conjunction with the green/white paper, which is basically the government attempting to come up with a long-term plan for the aviation industry all the way to 2050 to try to make it more competitive. So hopefully when these reports do start again, we will actually have a better idea of exactly what the situation is.
Stay tuned to the Australian Aviation Podcast for all of our incisive analysis.
This is the Bitra special, of course, as demanded by listeners. They want data. We've got data.
Is it relevant data? Maybe. But it is data.
It is data, right. Anyway, that's the end of my terrible reporting. Let's go back to the expert. Now, a story that we spoke about, I think last week or the week before, was as we're now calling it, the battle for Bali. And the battle for Bali started because initially Qantas requested the ability to fly extra flights to Bali, and because there's limited capacity from certain airports, they have to kind of apply. You have to go through the formalities of applying to put these flights on. The reason they're keen to do more Bali flights is that for some reason I don't understand, Bali is the destination that Australians want to go to. I don't like Bali that much, to be honest, but that's probably a different rant, and I don't want to upset the good people of Bali. But I don't think it's a great destination.
Well, let's put it this way, Adam. You know Ibiza?
Love Ibiza, of course. It's great.
It's like that.
Yes. An area of Spain. I do like to apologise on behalf to any Spanish person listening for the crimes and atrocities of the British people to a number of...
This is your revenge for the Armada. You guys have been playing a long game.
Yeah, no, there are whole swathes of Spain that have had any Spanish culture ripped out, mercilessly ripped out, till there is only Union Jacks and Champions League football present. No, I do apologise on behalf of the nation for that. But yeah, anyway.
and what, like Greggs and Weatherspoons?
I never apologise for Greg. Greggs is fantastic. Have you ever had a Greggs?
No, I've never met him.
No, he's not a hit. No, he's think of him as the greatest pie maker that there is, but he does pies as pasty.
I don't know. You ever had a Mrs. Max?
I haven't. No.
You ever had a 4 and 20?
No, don't think so.
You should get on those, Adam.
I will do. I love a pie. I love a pie. Anyway, where were we? Anyway,
you say this in the meat pie capital of the world, Adam. You better be prepared.
Well, you claim that.
You better be prepared to bring receipts.
You claim that. But yeah, I would say have a Greggs first. Now, anyway, let's get back to Bali. So essentially, yes, Qantas wanted to put on more flights because obviously it makes total sense. Bali is also one of the international destinations that has recovered the quickest from COVID and is also forecast to grow in future. So Qantas put their application in for this, thinking it would be something of a formality. I think within a week or so, Virgin kind of made a counter-offer, and because there's limited capacity, only one of the two could win it. It then took quite a nasty turn in the sense that Qantas basically came out, and it would be Jetstar that would be operating flights. So the Qantas group came out, and they did some kind of, not dodgy, but creative analysis and said, oh, well, actually, if you ever have a look, you'll find that the Jetstar flights are considerably cheaper than the ones you would get from Virgin, which may well be true, but obviously Virgin's a kind of a hybrid airline rather than a pure budget airline, and you get different... you get different service for your money, so you can't exactly compare them. But then we had Virgin come back and effectively accuse Qantas of relying too much on overseas-based crew and said, if you give the flights to us, you're kind of giving it to true blue, decent Australians, pumping the money back into the Australian economy. That was also a slightly unfair comparison, considering that Virgin put on very, very few international flights now compared to Qantas, so you can't really say. And then out of nowhere, the union have decided to get involved in the battle for Bali. Firstly, read out your headline that you're very proud of.
Yes, TWU joins the Virgin trenches in the battle for Bali.
The battle for Bali. The battle for Bali. Go on.
It's almost as good as Rexit, Adam, I think.
Rexit was excellent, to be fair. Rexit was excellent. But the battle for Bali, you've given this a level of grandeur I'm not entirely sure it deserves, but we're going to call it the Battle for Bali now. That's stuck. So the TWU have joined Virgin trenches in the Battle for Bali. Hey, so tell us more. What's going on here? Why have the TWU got involved?
Yeah, so the TWU have they've written to the IASC in support of Virgin's bid, basically saying that they have been won over by this promise to employ directly hired, locally based crews. The union said that these would significantly contribute to the growth of local aviation jobs in Australia. So Michael Caine, the National Secretary, he wrote to the IASC saying, quote, prioritising directly hired local aviation jobs is essential to the long-term stability of the aviation sector in Australia and maintaining a high level of safety and service standards. Virgin's commitment stands in Qantas with Jetstar and in contrast with Jetstar and Qantas's heavy reliance on internationally based crews, which concerningly have been shown to be paid as little as $2 an hour for an Indonesian-based crew. It is in the interests of the industry, airlines, airport workers and the travelling public for these additional services to be allocated to Virgin Australia, boosting local aviation jobs and representing a positive step towards rebuilding a sustainable and viable aviation industry in Australia.
The problem is, and I don't necessarily disagree with it, and they may well have been asked to make a formal submission. Presumably they didn't necessarily have to so overtly take one side or the other, but there is, to use a youth term, more beef between the TWU and Qantas historically than there is between TWU and Virgin.
No cap, Adam.
Yeah.
No cap.
Right. But and obviously Virgin recently secured a deal with the TWU, a pay deal. So how much of this do you think is their legitimate thought, and how much of this is simply old wounds, old rivalries running deep?
Look, there's probably some from column A and some from column B. I do think that, like, if you want to get the unions on side, promising more local jobs is obviously going to be a good thing. It's going to work in your favour. Virgin also did that whole thing. I think it was late last year they made the announcement that they were going to be insourcing a bunch of the jobs for ground handling. So they've brought a whole bunch of ground handling jobs back in-house, which has helped them as well in their relationship with the unions. Because you might remember there was some concern over whether cabin crews would be striking or taking industrial action over Christmas. So at the time, the TWU was very banging on very hard about Virgin. Keeping up its end of the bargain, promising to making sure that it promises to increase pay and conditions, after that pay freeze that the TWU agreed to during the whole COVID administration thing to make sure that the airline kept flying. They were coming. The TWU was going very hard on Virgin, very hard on Bain Capital. To try and sort of win support for this new enterprise agreement with better pay and conditions. So I think that now that that's all sorted, the TWU are probably wanting to make nice with Virgin again, and especially considering again this whole insourcing thing and this idea that Virgin is promising that these jobs will be done by Australian-based crews, contributing to Australian-based jobs, which is something that the unions want.
But if you were Qantas, their argument would be that Virgin can't necessarily compare, because after Virgin came out of administration, it now has a very limited international schedule, which doesn't really compare to Qantas, which is still flying to lots of major destinations. And Qantas would argue that they want to employ Australian crew, they want to have more Australian staff, but there is a talent crisis. It's not always easy to do that. And it's unfair to take them with this brush of saying, well, you're just using these all overseas crew. They would say that's not an unfair comparison. The other interesting thing with this is that for whatever motive a TWU does or doesn't have, them going on the side of Virgin is an extremely powerful endorsement And it's once you look at these disagreements, like 6 weeks ago, 2 months ago, the TWU was getting quite aggressive against Virgin. You had this sort of intervention from Richard Branson, and I don't know how involved he was or not, when he basically came out in a meeting of staff and said, "Look, you need to get this sorted out." And now Virgin, the TWU have gone being very angry with Virgin to all of a sudden being back in their corner, fighting against Qantas. This does show the power that unions have. In a lot of industries, they may not have power, but in the aviation industry, they're still very much a major player.
Yeah, and it's always good for the workers when they can have. When they have the power to get these better conditions, they should take it. I mean, there are arguments, around what happened with the collapse of Ansett. Was Ansett making too many concessions to the unions? You can't really blame unions for wanting to get the best deal possible for their members. Aviation workers, they do very important jobs. They do very hard jobs. Flight attendants are on their feet all day up and down planes, probably dealing with unruly passengers, unfortunate incidents like, bodily fluids up and down the aisles in some unfortunate cases.
Or presenting a podcast of us two idiots, which is the worst case scenario.
It's horrible. Or I think there was a guy, I heard about a guy who got so aggressive he had to be duct taped to his seat. I think this was it might have been in America somewhere. So they do hard jobs. They do deserve to be paid well and treated well.
And one of the issues that I would say is that unions in the aviation industry are so important in Australia in particular. Is obviously if say you are a flight attendant, you don't have many options. You effectively have an option of Qantas or Virgin. Generally, and because we have such little competition compared to almost every other major country, you need something to fight for your rights, because otherwise this kind of duopoly can make it very, very difficult. It's also fair to say that while I understand airlines need to keep their prices down, people that work in the Australian aviation industry are paid a lot worse than a lot of other places. They're paid significantly worse than they are in the US. So you do need some kind of union presence to give them more of a fair deal.
And in America, taking up your point, you've got a whole lot of different carriers that are servicing the United States. You're a lot more spoiled for choice. If you are an aviation worker in America, or if you're a passenger in America, as to who you're going to fly with. Are you going to fly with Spirit? You're going to fly with JetBlue, Delta, American, United, Alaska, all of these different airlines, Southwest, flying all over the country. You've got a lot of choice as to where to go, whereas Australia's aviation industry is one of the most concentrated in the world.
Right, we will move on to the next story that we're going to talk about, which is, and we've been saying this kind of off and on for the last few months, but Sydney Airport has officially declared the COVID crisis over. They have, to quote them, drawn a line under it, and they've recorded their best month since 2019. It's another kind of turning point that says that we are actually now back to normal. Jake, tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, so last month, over December 2023, there were a total of 3.58 million passengers through Sydney Airport. Now, this is 90.6% of December 2019 levels, 15.8% higher than what it was in December 2022. One thing that they have drawn attention to is that Australian passport holders travelling through Sydney Airport, so Australians using Sydney Airport, were higher than pre-pandemic numbers for the first time. So the number of Australians going through Sydney Airport were up 1.3% on December 2019. International travel saw a 93.3% recovery. Domestic was up, was still below 90% of 2019 levels, but this was up. It was still up 7.6% on December 2022. In total, for the year 2023, Sydney saw more than 38 million passengers. Now, in 2019, the record high was 44.4 million, but 38 million is a pretty respectable number.
To get to this point where you've actually got more Australians travelling internationally than pre-COVID is a major milestone. It does feel, though, that now the emphasis shifts on how do you persuade more people internationally to come to Australia. Now, one of the points I made during COVID is that for a lot of people, particularly weak, pathetic British people, Australia is...
So, British people.
Yeah, you can have that. Australia is seen as being a long, long way. It's it's a long, once-in-a-lifetime trip, that. And it was always going to be the case that when we saw the end of COVID, there was almost going to be a lag time in terms of Australia's recovery in terms of a tourist destination. So one of the stories I think I wrote, it might have been last year or the year before, was that we had a lot of people travelling to Australia for business purposes and to visit friends and family. But the amount of people actually going for a holiday was significantly down. And this is one of the reasons you had this Tourism Australia campaign where they ditched Kylie, the usual go-to to attract the Brits, and they got this little cuddly kangaroo. You've seen a little cuddly kangaroo thing.
Haven't seen the cuddly kangaroo.
You haven't seen the cuddly kangaroo? Because you're in Australia,
kangaroo.
you probably want to shoot them, don't you, rather than admire how nice they are.
They do taste very nice.
No, they don't. This is
do.
awful. You shouldn't be eating kangaroo.
Well, I mean...
They're bouncy and lovely. What's wrong with you?
Well, we've got a lot of kangaroos. And they were eating kangaroos for thousands of years before us white guys ever turned up.
Well, they're lovely, aren't they? Why would you? It's like what I'm saying. You just shoot the kangaroos. You don't like the fact that we introduced the lovely rabbit to your country. Beautiful rabbit.
Because the lovely rabbit has eaten a fair portion of the country.
Oh, they look lovely though.
Well, I think Australia is actually the only country in the world to eat both the animals on its coat of arms, because we also eat emu.
I'm trying to think. The British coat of arms has obviously got a lion, and we're not in any lions in the UK.
No, doesn't Scotland have a unicorn or something?
Yeah,
that'd be hard to get.
Yeah.
Anyway, one idea, Adam, is I don't know. What if we could get Ryanair down here?
You don't want that.
I don't know. Fly from. What airport in London does Gatwick fly out? Not Gatwick. Ryanair.
Luton is one of the big Ryanair airports.
So which one?
Luton.
Hey, Luton to Brisbane for 29 quid. I don't know.
What you're basically saying is that in order to save the Australian aviation industry, what we need to do is bring hundreds of thousands of pissed up yobbo Brits on a Ryanair flight and bring them into Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane. Do you want to, in Ghostbusters where they open the trap door and all the ghosts fly out, just hundreds of thousands of kind of drunk scousers with big cans of Carlsberg and Carling and probably Foster's as well, just kind of throwing up over themselves as they stumble out of the aircraft. You want to unleash that misery on Australia.
It sounds like an average night on the Gold Coast.
Oh, I love the Gold Coast, and maybe that's because I'm British. The Gold Coast is full of decent people.
I'm sure they're somewhere. Getting back to Sydney Airport for a moment, the CEO, Scott Charlton, did say that, he did say that this news that Aussie passenger volumes are above 2019 levels is a good way to, he said, draw a line under the COVID era. He said, quote, December performance also demonstrates how far we have come since the start of the year. In January, we were 79% recovered compared to pre-COVID. The border to China was still closed, and there was a lack of capacity on key overseas routes. By the end of the year, international passenger volumes have almost fully recovered. And we have experienced one of the strongest China recoveries of any international airport globally, with 9 airlines flying 89 return services weekly to mainland China. In 2023, we saw extra international capacity translate into strong passenger volumes in the India and South Korea markets.
So between the recovery in China and bringing in a load of drunk British people, we could well turn this whole situation around.
Yeah, and apologies to any of our listeners on the Gold Coast. I'm sure there I'm
the
sure
damage is done. The
I'm sure-
damage
look,
is done.
I'm-
You can't.
any of our
No.
decent, hardworking listeners on the Gold Coast, I'm sure that both of you are very
Yeah,
upset
I
right
saw
now.
that joke coming.
So send in your feedback, and we will do our best to ignore it.
I worry that next week this podcast is just going to be me talking to myself. The weight they're dropping. We've lost Chris. You'll be dragged off air. You know, the good people, the Queensland government will get involved. You know, the mayor of the Gold Coast. And that'll be you gone.
It's like in that Simpsons episode. They did that Simpsons episode with the Streetcar Named Desire musical. You know, it's saying that New Orleans was, you know, a horrible cesspit, and the people of New Orleans complained, and so the chalkboard gag for the next episode was, "I will not defame New Orleans."
Right, now let's go and do one. Time's almost beaten us, but we know what I really want to talk about on this show. It's not aeroplanes, and it's not even trains. It's buses.
Have you gone mad, Adam?
Buses. Well,
You've gone mad with power.
No. We need more bus stories. I like buses. I like single-decker buses. I like double-decker buses. I like those hendy-bendy long buses. I get a bus every morning. Love a bus. Love a bus and a road. Decent Aussie people get decent red buses and they travel around. I want a bus story. You've defamed the Gold Coast. If you want to save your spot on this show, if you want to save your career, I need a bus story. I need it now.
You're a madman, Adam. You're a tyrant. You're undermining the entire. This is not Australian busiation.
It is now.
That's not even a word.
It is.
As a matter of fact, we did have a bus story.
Of course we did.
We did have a bus story
Lucky
over the
for
past
you.
week. This is revolving around Melbourne Airport. So don't panic. It is relevant to aviation in a way.
Barely, go on.
Melbourne Airport is wanting more improved local bus services as this sort of stoush, a word we love, about the rail link continues. So if you've been to Melbourne Airport, you will know that the public transport situation out there is pretty dire. They have got the Skybus service, which is a premium service that goes to Southern Cross Station in the CBD, and it goes to Frankston in the southeast to connect you to the Mornington Peninsula. I think they used to have other services to places like St Kilda, but those aren't currently running. In terms of public transport Victoria buses, only 4 bus routes serve the airport. So that's the 478, the 479, the 482, and the 901. The 902. Of those, only the 902 operates after 7:45 p.m. or more than once an hour. And the 482 only runs on weekdays, so it's not great for those who need to get to the airport and don't want to shell out a whole bunch of money for the Skybus. Another problem is, Jai McDermott, the Melbourne Airport's chief of ground transport. Now, he has said that Skybus does a great job connecting with the city and the Mornington Peninsula, but staff and passengers from the north and west of Melbourne nearby the airport are being poorly served by this lack of local buses. He says that, Melbourne Airport employs more than 18,000 people, but people who live around the airport don't have great access to buses, and cabs don't really want to travel such a short distance. I mean, if you've ever tried to catch a cab from the airport, you'll know that they want to take you as far as possible. So you can't really get a cab from the airport to your house if you live if you live nearby Tullamarine Airport, so your only option is to drive.
Call me cynical, but surely the problem with a lack of local buses has been a problem that has been ongoing, I would imagine, for a very, very, very long time. And so therefore I would say, well, why are you bringing up this now? You're bringing up this now because you are currently in a row over your train link, and at what point, what form it's going to take, whether it's underground or overground.
Or wombling free.
Yes, I knew that was going to come. Or in fact, because the thing we've got nowhere near starting actually building it yet. So the argument was they actually don't care about putting on more buses for the average punter or the average worker at the airport. This is simply a way to lobby for the train station. What would you say to that?
I mean, whatever the motives here, The fact that they're calling attention to the dire state of the buses is a good thing. Whether they genuinely care or whether they're just trying to sneakily lobby for the rail link, and they have said we're still committed to the rail link. Jai McDermott has said, while we work towards a link that puts passengers first, immediate action is needed to fix the airport's woeful local bus services. So whatever their motives are for bringing it up now, it's still a good thing that they brought it up.
And I would imagine some parts of northern Melbourne, where these people live, it's even worse than the Gold Coast. Like, if you live in northern Melbourne, I mean, at least let them get to work on time
without having to drive and fill up the car parks.
It does seem quite extraordinary that this has happened. And again, I think that the Skybus does actually do a fairly good service. I mean, obviously, it's not a train link, but it does a fairly good way of doing it. But obviously, like you were saying, it's only going from A to B. It doesn't not actually able to help anybody who works at the airport.
The one that goes to the Mornington Peninsula might have more stops. Don't quote me on this. This is just off the top of my head. But I know that the one that goes from the city that just goes to Southern Cross Station is just a express service. It does not stop anywhere along the route. Mind you, most of the route is highway, but still, it's a great thing. It's a fine thing if you need to get directly to Southern Cross Station. If you need to get anywhere else, not so good.
So I think what we can end the show on saying is that what we need more planes, because we always need more planes. We need more trains. And we now need more buses. So in many ways, we've expanded far beyond our remit. And I think next week, we simply rebound to Australian public transport.
Australian transportation?
Yeah, Australian transportation. And then, I mean, we can take on those other industry publications in those other, and we can take that over. And then we can grow to become all-powerful.
We will be all news outlets eventually.
You know how you get plane spotters and how you get train spotters? Do you reckon there's like bus spotters as well? Do you think there's somebody like now noting down the license plate?
Probably, yeah. Yeah, I particularly if you've got, nice buses.
If you are a bus enthusiast, and you want to communicate with somebody on the team, it's jake.nelson at Momentum Media.